And if you drink enough beer, you don't care if the steak is prepared just exactly right. So I thought I was really good. I was born in Richlands, Virginia at the Maddie Williams Hospital in 1950. I grew up in Richlands and Cedar Bluff. I would have probably lived in the same house until I left, except the state of Virginia, in their infinite wisdom, decided to put a highway in, and so we had to move. So we had a small grocery store on Jones Chapel Road, and I did work in there from the time I was about 5 or 6 years old until until I left and got a real job and moved out. And we had another one in Cedar Bluff. My family, pretty much everybody on both sides of my family owned businesses. My grandfather, on my dad's side, his business was moonshining. And he did real well with it until sometime after World War II. And sugar became so expensive after World War II, he quit moonshining and went to work in the coal mines. And just after I was born, he was run over and killed walking home from the coal mines by one of his former customers. On my dad's side, both of my aunts and their husbands owned businesses in Buchanan County. My Uncle Harry Farrell owned the Gold Key and some other smaller businesses in Buchanan County. One of my favorite things to do back when I got a driver's license was to drive to the Gold Key on Sundays when the United Mine Worker Unions were having their meetings. They would come to the Gold Key and eat and then have their meeting. It was always interesting. They would buy so much beer, and we'd stack the beer cases up, and so they'd have them, and we'd put them on the ice. I cooked the steaks for. Uncle Harry had a grill that was hot, hotter, and really hot. So you put all the steaks on at the same time, and the rare ones came off here, the mediums came off here, and the well-dones came off here. You just turn them over at the same time. It was really simple. And if you drink enough beer, you don't care if the steak is prepared just exactly right. So I thought I was really good. When we would finish with the day, the guys that were there for the meetings, as they went out the door, any of the cases of beer that were still there, they would pick them up and go out the door. There would always be some left. Now, a 15-year-old's not allowed to drink, but my cousin Gary, who was 17 years old, he and I would always somehow figure out a way to have some of that in our trunks when it was over. Now, did the United Mine Workers pay for that? I don't know, but we drank it. We used to go to my uncle Leon Ratliff. He owned the bus station in Grundy. It was at that time. It was right near where the hospital is over there now, and he owned some other properties over there as well. My uncles on my dad's side, on my mom's side rather, pardon me, they both were business people as well. And my aunt Neva, on my mom's side, she was the postmaster in Richlands for a number of years. And her husband had a grocery store in the Dalton Addition, like my parents had on Jones Chapel Road and then in Cedar Bluff. Now, my uncles on mom's side, they started out in the bar business. And they were both alcoholics. My Uncle Jack was on Iwo Jima from day one. He spent the entire battle there. Now, my Uncle Grover was also involved in some fairly serious stuff. I think they both would have probably been alcoholics regardless, but they had a wonderful reason to drink, to forget, because of some of the stuff they saw. So the family was very forgiving of what they did. They both succeeded in businesses. They both owned bars. Both of them in West Virginia. They both had illicit gambling operations going on in the Pineville area, and that my grandmother, their mother, she owned a boarding house in Jewel Ridge, West Virginia, Jewel Ridge, Virginia, when the mines were operating big. She would lease rooms to the miners. They would come and stay. She'd feed them. She didn't get paid till they got paid. When the mines paid, they paid her first. That was her deal. But when that stopped, there's a time when people find that their income's a little more stable. They're not renting. They want to buy. And then the companies had their own company properties that they did as well. They called them coal camps. So they would go there and have more room. They could bring their families. Most of the time, their families were not with them when she had that. So she went to Baltimore. I'm not sure what she did up there, but then she remarried, moved back to West Virginia, and her new husband, Harvey Kennedy, had a number of bars, or as restaurants, drive-in restaurants, but they all served beer. And they didn't make a lot of money from food, except for one of the three. Well, when Harvey and my grandmother, Lottie Meade, when they divorced, she got one of those. So I spent a lot of very good quality time at the East End Drive-In in Pineville, West Virginia. And she was probably the smartest person in our family. And she had graduated from Radford University. She had her teacher's certificate. She could do whatever she wanted to do. She found out she could make a better living and take care of her children better with the things that she did in business than she could teaching, because to this day, we don't pay teachers what they should get. However, this day, they're not really teaching anymore. They're doing social engineering. So we need to reevaluate that. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about. I apologize. I throw all that conservative stuff in all the time. It's just the way it was made. And she's the reason for that too. She was a Republican when it wasn't real cool, and my whole family everybody were Democrats. I mean, they were coal miners and relatives of coal miners. They were Democrats. And
Why do you think that was?
The Democrats at one time were much more supportive to labor. They looked at labor more for. They weren't involved in social issues as much as they were. They became the liberal Democrats when I was a kid were not much different than the conservative Republicans. I guess what I'm saying is I learned business because my entire family were business people, everybody, and I learned a lot from mom and dad. They had a business. I would go work for my uncle in Grundy. I'd work for my grandmother some when I would go stay with her. She liked it when I came over there and stayed because it took work away from her, And then when she got older and was not as healthy as she was, she moved in with my parents. And my parents had a fairly large place in Cedar Bluff, and she put in a fabric shop. She found a place, a source to buy fabric. And she also sold the patterns, the simplicity patterns. She had every simplicity pattern there was. And her and my mother would also make clothes for people. They would come in, pick out the pattern, pick out the material, and it was just a little sewing factory. And they did that, not especially to make a lot of money, although they did quite well with it. They did it because my grandmother needed something to do, to not just sit around and not be productive. Because when you've been productive most of your life and you get to the point where you're retired, it's real hard not to find something to do. Because I think a lot of times as people get older, they look at not being productive or not having a job as maybe becoming obsolete or something, and they don't quite live as long. If you look, a lot of people that completely don't do anything after they retire, they die very shortly. And she didn't. She lived for a long time, and it was good for me because Dad bought this land yacht, a giant van, and I would drive her to places in North Carolina where she had discovered that she could buy fabric at a decent price, and we would load the van down with the fabric and bring it back. And I learned negotiation from her. She would walk through there and she'd tell me, she'd say, remember this, there were bolts of cloth, and these were not the stuff the factories used, giant things. They were smaller, maybe a quarter of a bolt or something. And she would look, they called them remnants, and she would look through there and she'd pick out 15, 20 bolts that she wanted, and she'd say, remember this, and I'd pull out a little pad and I'd write the prices down on that and everything. And she was brilliant with math. She could do math just like that. And so I would show her that, and she'd look at it and she'd say, that's $3,000. And she would go over there and she'd say, here's what I'd like to do. And she'd tell them what she wanted, and she'd say, I can give you $800 for it. And she knew she wasn't going to get it for $800, but she knew that she wasn't going to pay $3,000 either. And so they'd go back and look, and they'd come back and they'd pull their hair out, and it's you're robbing me. It was and I felt bad for them sometimes and she held it, and they'd come down to maybe $1,200 or $1,400 or something. She'd say, come on, Richard Dale. By the way, they called me Richard Dale when I was growing up because I don't know. Is it Southern Appalachians? You use two names, and she always called me Richard Dale, and the rest of them call me Richard Dale, only one D. So she always put in both D's. I always admired that about her. But so we'd start towards the door. wait, hold on. And I don't know if they ever came down to the price she initially offered, but they came awfully close every time. And there was multiple places we went to. So we'd get back in the van and she'd tell me, and she'd explain stuff to me. I mean, it was the ride down there and back was a wonderful education. I would have given almost anything to have had 25 more of those trips because of the things that she taught me. I went into the radio business by accident. I hadn't have a job. I was working in the coal mines and got laid off. So I went into the radio business, and one of the things she always told me, whatever you're doing, if there's any balance in it that has to be negotiated, you're only worth what you negotiate. If you think you're worth $10 an hour, you'll get $10 an hour. If you think you're worth more, then you better be willing to negotiate for it. And I always remembered that. And that was the same thing when you're selling advertising. Advertising on the radio or TV is sold as an auction. You sell it. Somebody buys it. And if you can sell it to somebody else for more, you bump them out. So if you negotiate with an advertiser for too low a rate, you're not being fair to the advertiser. You're cheating them out of their advertising. And it works. I've sold newspapers, I've sold cable, I've sold radio, and every bit of it works. It's just the amount you have to do to get it done. When up until I was probably 25 years old, we always had family get-togethers in the Breaks Interstate Park. And the reason that we did that was because my great-great-grandfather, Richard Potter, at one time owned the entire area over there. There's a reproduction of his cabin, a reproduction of his moonshine still in the breaks today. A lot of the Potters in that area are now my second, third cousins, and on that site where you do your Ancestry.com, I get notifications about once a month, we have found a new third cousin. When they get on the site, when they've got their DNA in there, then and they are. You know, it's we go back and we trace, and it's kind of an interesting thing. The Potter family, Richard and his family, at the time that my grandfather Powers was there, they had pretty much a lock on the area for moonshine. It's called Potter Flats. They moonshine. People didn't go into Potter Flats without permission. They got killed, and that's not an exaggeration. You can go to Pike County and look up the records. Dad used to tell this story about one of his uncles that shot two revenuers, federal employees, and they went to court to prosecute him for murder, and he walked because he was a game warden, and it was hunting season. It was not hunting season, and they were in the woods with firearms, and when he ordered them to drop their firearms, they shot at him, so he killed them both. Now, is that the way it went down? The judge thought so, and so they took things in their own hands a lot more back then. But also in the breaks in that area, the reason my grandfather Powers became familiar, and the reason he married one of the granddaughters of Richard, he had an ability to make the spiraled copper tube that fed the moonshine stills. He made them better than anybody, and he passed that knowledge on to Dad, and Dad passed that knowledge on to me, and so I can make those as well. It's not a real complicated process, but he kept it secret because it was worth a lot of money to him. But the reason he stopped making moonshine and went to work in the coal mines was because sugar got so expensive that he couldn't sell his moonshine cheaper than you could buy it at the liquor store. So he said there's no point in doing it. So he went to work in the coal mines, and then walking home from the coal mines one day, he got run over by one of his old customers, and that's how he died. I never knew my grandfather Powers. I heard all the stories. Everything I knew from him was secondhanded. I think he was a man of his time. I think he may not have been the kindest person in the world. He took care of his kids. He took care of his wife. He did everything he was supposed to do. On the other side of my family, my mother's father, he was a very mean person, very, very mean. He beat my grandmother. He beat all the kids, and he beat anybody else he could get in front of him. He was probably about 6'5", maybe 6'6", monstrous man. I remember him. He owned a bunch of there were tenements, apartment buildings in Baltimore, and we'd go visit him, and he would go collect, and he wore a .38 pistol on his belt where it was visible, and he had to collect because if he didn't go collect, he wouldn't get paid, and he scared a lot of people, and he not only scared them, he hurt them. I mean, he was a mean man. I mean, there's just no other way of saying it. He was an alcoholic. He'd get drunk. He would get into fights. Police would come to arrest him. They wouldn't arrest him. They were afraid of him, as they should have been. But in my child's mind, when we used to go see him, he was the greatest thing in the world. He gave us sugar cookies. But then when I get older and I hear all the stories about what he did, and one of my uncles, he was pretty rough. My Uncle Grover, he was pretty rough. He, if you saw a picture of him and a picture of Robert Mitchum, you would have trouble telling the difference. They look that much alike. He was pretty rough, and he used to tell me he'd come and spend time with my parents and dry out for a while. And he'd go fishing, and he'd take me fishing. Oh, I loved him. He was one of the greatest people in the world. He'd come on, let's go. I'd go with him. We'd go, and he'd tell me these stories about Walter, grandfather Meade, and it was amazing some of the things that he told. And my Uncle Jack, he went from the bar business to refrigeration. He owned a refrigeration company. I believe it was in, to start with, it was in Ruckersville near Charlottesville, and then he went to just outside Richmond. My mother became very ill when I was 2 or 3 years old, and she had uterine cancer. And because of my Uncle Jack's expertise in the refrigeration business, he came to Richlands, and we had a giant coal furnace in the basement of the cinder block house. Had this giant coal furnace, and he got to looking at it, and it was hot, and mom was sick. And he figured which tubing ductwork went to the bedroom. So he goes and picks up an old refrigerator, takes the refrigeration unit out of it, takes the ductwork out, installs the refrigeration unit in the ductwork. She had air conditioning in her bedroom. So you see, everybody in my family were in business, and they worked with what they had. You couldn't always come up with the money to go out and buy something, but you might be able to build it. You know, the campers that are on pickup trucks now. We were going fishing, we were going to Big Tumbling, and there's about 6 of us in the back of the truck. We were going to Little Tumbling, not Big Tumbling. And so it rained. We all got covered up, you know, it was soaking wet, but we didn't care, you know, we were kids. So as we were coming back, Dad saw a truck sitting on the side of the road that had one of those prefabricated things on it. Now, this is the first one he had ever seen. And I don't even remember it. I just remember, you know, that we turned around, went back, and he looked at it, got out and walked around it. Well, he made one. Now, he didn't make it with any metal on it. He made it with wood and canvas, but it was perfect. Next time we went to, I think we went to Boone Lake the next time that it rained so hard. We didn't get a bit wet, but you know now, if you were in the back of that truck riding down the road, you're going to get a ticket. But we didn't think anything about it. It was just an amazing type of life, really. You didn't. We've gained so much in the United States, but we've lost so much more. You know, we can, if Don and I are talking about a subject, just pull my phone out and say, "Hey Google." Well, we know exactly what, you know. Well, that's what I thought, but this is what this says. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time with the Collier's Encyclopedia. The Collier's Encyclopedia man came to sell my parents Collier's Encyclopedia. And they were expensive. And Dad didn't want to buy it. And I cried because I thought it would be the best thing in the world. When I was 4 years old, I walked across the hill from Jones Chapel, where our grocery store and home was, to Richlands High School. And I took a book out of one of the bookshelves. I went over there because I wanted to learn how to read, and you had to go to school to learn how to read. Now, my aunt, who was the postmaster in Richlands, she helped me a lot with reading. I couldn't read it before, but I knew a letter or two or whatever. Well, I get over to Richlands High School. They don't know who I am. They ask me who I am. I'm Dale. I didn't know what my last name was. You know, I never had to have I didn't have a driver's license, social security card or nothing. So they start bringing people to the office from different classes that are from across. I told them to walk across. So they finally brought a girl in that knew me, and she told them who I was. So they contacted Mom. I'm supposed to be in the house. Mom at that time had a lady that had fallen on some poor times, sad times, that she had taken in and was supposedly working as a babysitter too. She let me go. I just went to so anyway, they brought me back. The point is, I wanted to learn. That was the biggest thing, biggest goal for me. So when I am reading, and I'm 3rd or 4th grade, I guess in the 4th grade because I was in Richlands then, because the first 3 I was in Cedar Bluff. So between Mom, me crying, and the salesman, Dad broke down. Everything was fine. I was happy. The salesman leaves. He comes over and gets within an inch of my face. And he said, when those come in, you will read every single page of every one of those volumes, and I will test you on them. And I did. I read the entire Encyclopedia Collier's from first page all the way. Because I believe I learned more in that, in working for 3 years in New York City and from my grandmother, than I did from any class I ever sat in for education. I think that most of the people that if you have one-on-one ability with someone, you can teach them. If you're in a class, they want to be taught to learn. And once you get into those situations, if you've already read the entire encyclopedia and they're talking about something that you are somewhat aware of or maybe know very well, you don't pay attention. So you miss things, or I did. So I think I learned more from being from on my own, and still do. I mean, still do. I don't know, it's and I know that I know a lot of stuff because my ex-wife used to call me a know-it-all. That's a fact.
Tell me a little bit about the time in the coal mines. Is that right out of high school? And
Well, no, it wasn't. When I first, my dad was a coal miner. My dad was injured a time or two in the coal mines. He did not want me to go in the coal mines. He actually was injured so bad one time they took him to the funeral home in Grundy, and he woke up down there with all the lights off, and it was. He said it was quite traumatic, but because he was stumbling around, running into things, he had a real bad head. Anyway, back injury, head injury. But he did not want me to go to work in the coal mines because he knew there's two things in the coal mines you have to worry about. Something's going to fall on you, something's going to run over you, crush you, or you're going to get black lung. He knew that, so he didn't want me to go. So I went to college until decided to get married, and then I got married and started driving a truck for Eastern Isles, which was a garment manufacturer over Richlands for a long time. And I went North Carolina, South Carolina, wherever garment stuff was. But our main offices were in New York City. So I spent a lot of time there. Well, after my son was born, my ex-wife didn't like the fact that I was gone. I spent more time. I spent at least 5 days a week in New York. And she didn't like that. And her mother, bless her heart, her mother was a provocateur, I guess is the best way to say it. She decided she didn't like the fact that I wasn't there. And anyway, my son was coming. That was the biggest reason. So I came back one week when I had a week off, and I went to Island Creek, Jewel Ridge, and Bishop Coal Company. And when I got to Bishop, the last one I went to, the other said, we'll call you. And, we've got a training program starting. Go to Bishop. They say, can you start tomorrow? Literally. And so I went and told Eastern Isles, I had to give them 2 weeks because that was the right thing to do. So I gave them 2 weeks, then I went to work in the coal mines. So I was probably 24 maybe, I guess, when I started working in coal mines. I was a huge supporter of the union. I thought the union was the best thing in the world. I've been working about 3 weeks and go to work. I was working the third shift, go to work one night at Bishop, and pretty long drive, probably cost $5 in gas back then, even though gas was 30 cents a gallon. It's still, you only got 8 or 9 miles a gallon. And so go to work, and they're not going to work. I said, why we're not working? We're striking. Why? Well, I don't know. You don't know? We're going to strike. We're going to lose a shift's pay, and we don't know why. Well, I hadn't been there long, so I didn't have any authority. I didn't have any voice whatsoever. I had to follow. After I'd been there for about a year, and this happened on a regular basis. If you got a full paycheck at that time without a strike, it was a very lucky week or 2 weeks. So I'd been there about a year. I liked the third shift. It worked good for me. I didn't sleep much back then five and a half hours was all the sleep I required. So I could go to work on the third shift, come home, get a lot of stuff done, get into bed, sleep, and by the time that everybody else was getting home at 5 or 6 o'clock, I was ready to go too. So it was a good thing for me. Well, District 29 had a job opening. It was for district safety. I don't remember what they call it. Safety supervisor, safety, whatever. But there was 2 positions. One was going to work out of Beckley, and one was going to work out of Charleston. And they said, we're going to base it on 3 different tests. And you had 2 written tests and an oral test. And Levi Daniel was the president of District 29. He was located in Beckley at the time. And Levi called me at home and said, you've got the top scores. I said, well, what does that mean? I get to go to Beckley or Charleston? He said, well, the international's coming in and they're going to look at everything. He said, we have to work through them. I didn't get the job. They gave the job to one of a guy named David McAteer, who was working with the international, and then he left there and became those big oxygen rebreathers that the coal miners had. He went to work for that company, and he went to Congress and helped them force that through. So he was making money. He was building himself. So one of his compatriots ended up getting one of the jobs, and that was the only one I knew for sure. The other one, by then I was ready to leave. You know, I wanted nothing to do with the union anymore, and so shortly after that, I went to work at Jewel Ridge because I'd already made my mine foreman's card. Well, Bishop wasn't going to hire me because I'd been involved in too many strikes, so they don't want a supervisor that had been in strikes. I had never walked out on my own, but that's what they told me. So I went to Jewel Ridge, and they were opening mines, and they told me as soon as we get a job, you can have it. And they did. They did what they said. So I left the union because of they're not a good organization.
And this was during what, mid-'70s, this time frame?
Right.
And I guess in the overall life cycle, like the early booms of the 30s up through the 50s, that had begun to wane.
Well, in the 50s, it really died out. My dad was a coal miner in the 50s and early 60s. I guess maybe even early to mid 60s, probably 63, 64. He had a number of different jobs. He went to Baltimore, drove a bus. I had relatives that lived up there. He stayed with them. He drove, and we had the grocery store, so we were okay. But he wasn't making any money. And when I talk about you're not feeling productive, that's really bad like that. So he went to Baltimore and worked driving the bus up there, and they started having all kinds of robberies of the bus drivers, and they didn't have $75, but they got a couple shots. So Mom didn't want him to do that anymore so he gets a real safe job after that. He goes to Richmond and becomes a prison guard, and he worked there. He would the way his schedule worked, he would work for, I think it was 15 days straight, and then he'd have 7 days off. So he'd come home for a week. So we'd see him, once 1 week out of every 3. And so he did that during the time that you're talking about when the coal mines were down. And then he worked at Aminata when he first got laid off. And then it started picking back up. And
that's the time you got in?
Yeah, just a little bit before.
Like a resurgence?
Yeah, it started. I worked at Seaboard 2, and then Dad was already at Seaboard 1, which is part of the reason I got the job at Seaboard 2, because the guy that was running Seaboard 2 had been Dad's direct supervisor at Seaboard 1, and he said, if you're half the man your dad is, said you're a hell of a man. And that's what he said when he talked to me. And I mean, I didn't get hired on my merits. I got hired because I had the dad that I had. And I was aware of it. And so anyway, when I went to work there, I guess I worked about 7 months running shuttle cars, roof bolters, continuous miners, and then I became a supervisor. And within, I guess, 2 years, I was running the third shift. I had three section foremen and a general work foreman under me. We were responsible for putting all the belts in, moving all the belts, and mining coal as well. So we had. It was kind of an interesting thing. I also, when I was at Bishop, I found out that if you knew how to use dynamite, you could get extra shifts. Well, I became a shot firer. I learned how to use dynamite. And so anything that got blown up in the coal mines at Seaboard, I did it because I could do it. So that was job security. You got to think about job security. So when you're in the union, you learn how to run every piece of equipment. You know exactly what your responsibilities are, and you don't just learn how to use them. You learn how to use them well, because if you can't, then they don't really need you, and that's the whole thing. But
what you did? You said 20 years roughly in the mines.
A little more than 20, yeah. 21, 22, counting. I was about 20 at Jewel Ridge, right at 20 at Jewel Ridge. Then I had 2.5 years at Bishop. Yeah. At Seaboard, when they put the mines in, the two mines, Seaboard 1 and Seaboard 2, the life of the mines was predicted to be about 20, 25 years, each one of them. And they had projected to do about $1 million a year in revenue from each mines. Shortly after I became third shift mine foreman, I started taking classes again to try to complete my degree. And I was, some of the classes I was taking were in Abingdon, and I'd have to leave the mines, drive to Abingdon, and then come back. Well, I'd stop at this little restaurant over in Lebanon and grab something to eat, one way or the other. Well, the president of Piston, who was there in Lebanon, he started, as I was coming home, I started noticing he was there. Now, when I would go in, I would order breakfast. I wouldn't order a hamburger because I'm getting ready to go to bed in a little while, and so I don't want anything real heavy. And I knew him, but he didn't know me. And so he walked by me one day and he said, "Every time I come in here, you're eating breakfast." And I told him what I was doing. So, and he said, "Oh, you're the guy, you're at Seaboard 2. I said, "Yeah." He knew me after he knew my name. He said, "Yeah, y'all got a good job going there." I said, we put those mines in to do $1 million a year. I said, "At your mines, you're doing about $1.5 million a month now." So that was how much, you're talking about the boom. That's how much the boom was. And we did even better than that later. And within another 5 years, I was the general mine foreman, running the whole mines. And I got to learn a lot there. I got to learn a lot. It was a lot more human nature working with 135, 140 people instead of the 7 or 8 on a section, or the 40 that you've got overall on the shift. So it was and it was fun. It really was. It's and very dangerous, very dangerous. I got hurt several times in the mines. I got 2 pretty bad concussions. I got one just riding down the track and a rock fell on me. I dislocated my coccyx, my tailbone, in a crash in there. Dislocated my shoulder and separated it. Reached up to hit a signal, and my glove caught on a piece of exposed wire. Just, the things that happen to everybody. And I'm not unusual. Everybody that spent 20 years in the coal mines has the same kind of injuries. They have back injuries, they have shoulder injuries, they have leg injuries, all these things, and it accumulates. You get to the point where you don't feel as good. Everybody breathes the air. And I don't care if you worked in the coal mines for 5 years, you have a trace of black lung. Everybody that worked there did. And if you say you don't, you weren't underground. Because there is no coal mines in the world that doesn't put dust in the atmosphere. I'll give you an example of how they tried to keep that undercover. Paul Harvey. Everybody knows Paul. Well, anybody my age knows Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey came to Richlands. He was the speaker at the annual Chamber of Commerce Person of the Year banquet. And he came, Alan Funt came, a number of people came. It was a very good time. I mean, it was a lot of money, and they could afford to do stuff. Well, he came, and they set up he wanted to look at the coal mines. He wanted to go in it. So they set up a situation to where they cut a cross cut. And the way it works is you drive down, and 5 headings, whatever, you drive them all down, and then you cut them together. And you've got blocks from 40 to 80 feet around. They're not round, but square. And so they set a situation up where they had a cross cut that was about to hole through in the other side. Normally, you have curtain that's hanging on one side, and the air comes down, and it goes behind the curtain. Well, you've got 15 foot of space where the air is coming down, and you've got 3 or 4 feet where it's going out. So that really restricts the amount of air that can come out. And you get dust that backs up. Always there's dust at the binder operator, unless they're remote and they're back with 20 foot more. And they didn't have that back in. You always have dust. So they set the situation up where they were ready to hold this thing through from a cross cut into another heading. So they punched a little hole in it. That way they can take all the curtain out, force all the air straight across the miner, and they don't have any dust. It's just not there. So they left it until Paul Harvey comes in. And then they take the crew back over there, and they finish the little cut through on the right side, and then they let him watch them mine the rest of it out, 6, 8 shuttle cars. And he goes on the air and tells how there's no dust in the coal mines. Literally said there's no dust in the coal mines. Now, was it better then than what it was when I started? Absolutely. But he was set up. He saw what he was supposed to see, which is what we all are seeing now, all the time. The only thing now is we're paying a little more attention than we did then. Then the next year, as I said, we had Alan Funt, the candid camera guy. He came, and he was the speaker. And so it was my responsibility to take him in. And so I take him underground, and he's asking me all kinds of questions. Where'd coal come from? So I had to give him, there was all this forests and all this vegetation, and then we had this flop over, and it put it in the ground, and anyway, tell him the scientific reason that we had coal. And then he said, well, where's oil come from? I said, well, same thing happened in the ocean, only the fish and the things, anyway. Had to explain that to him, and which was the reason that they wanted me to take him in, because they figured if I didn't know, I could make up a good lie that would sound good. And so he, as we were coming back out, the funniest thing, he had just released this movie called What Do You Say to a Naked Something? I can't remember what it was. But he said, he said, I think I'm going to bring my film crew out here. And he said, y'all got women coal miners here. He said, I'm going to make a movie. What do you say to a naked coal miner? I said, well, come on out at the shower, and at showers, I'll show you something. And he said, really? Anyway, that was Alan Funt. It was quite an interesting day.
So Dale, why did you ultimately get out of coal?
I didn't get out of coal. They got out of me. I was the youngest shift foreman, mine foreman that they had. And when I say youngest, not just in age, but the youngest in time. They started shutting mines down at Jewel Ridge and Clinchfield, and they had people that had far more years at those jobs than I did. And I was one of the last four. Well, actually, the first thing I did is I went back to running a section because they had so many shift foremen and mine foremen and superintendents. I mean, we had the on and at Seaboard 2, we had a superintendent, a general mine foreman, a general work foreman, all on the day shift that had all been superintendents. Actually, the superintendent had been a vice president, so he went from vice president to superintendent, and so I didn't really have any choice to take, and I didn't get a pay cut, which was kind of interesting. They gave me a demotion in title, but not in pay. And then they started shutting mines down at a quite a bit more rapid rate, and they asked me to go to different mines and evaluate foremen and decide which foremen were the best foremen. And I'd work sometimes for 6 weeks and 2 weeks on each shift and work with them. And I did that for about 3 mines, and it became very uncomfortable because you walk into a new operation and they know who you are and they know why you're there. And so I asked if I could have something else, and they said, well, we can lay you off. And I said, okay, that'll work. I'm okay with that. I had no intention the day that I was laid off to ever work another day in the coal mines. So I knew I could do something. I knew I could do anything that I wanted to do. So I had a couple of jobs that weren't much, and then I realized that if I got a commission job in sales or something to that effect, I could make pretty good money. So I went to Johnson City, and they just started selling the. You remember the 6-foot satellite dish before the little 18-inch dish? Well, they started selling those that would give you all the channels. And I went to work for a company that was selling those. Well, I don't remember how much we were selling them for, but there was one system I made $300 on. There was another system that I made $500 on. And then I got residuals on the programming. Turner Programming up in Bluefield, that was who they programmed through. And for years, I got checks from them where they sold that stuff. Well, I thought it was a pretty good idea, and so I took the job. Well, you didn't have a territory; you went where you wanted to. So I would call a cable company, and I'd tell them an address, and I'd say, "Can y'all get me cable?" And they'd say, "No, we don't have cable there." So I'd go up and knock on the door and say, would y'all like cable? Say, cable, yeah. And we have personal cable systems we're selling. And I think I had something like a 98% closing ratio. I thought I was the best salesman in the world. But you go in and you talk to the family, and you've got the kids over here, and you've got the adults right here, and the wife says, well, right here, you open your book up and you show, we have that channel. I mean, Turner did a wonderful job of putting this stuff together. And the kids say, I like Disney. Oh, yeah. And not just Disney, but, you had all those other kids' channels. And it's kind of like I told you about Dad and the encyclopedia. The kids, oh, yeah, and the wife, oh, yeah. The husband who was going to end up paying for it, he was done for. He wasn't going, there was no nose. But here's what you had to do. You had to take your compass before you went in to talk to them, and go out there and see if the dish could see the satellite. Now, with the 6-foot dish, it was very few places you couldn't get a signal. Now, with those 18-inch dishes, there's a lot of places you can't get a signal. But anyway, we didn't sell those. But I made a lot of money. I made more money in the time that, probably more money in the couple of years that I sold those things than I did total for the last 5 years worked in the coal mines. But then they came out with the 18-inch dish. So that killed that. You're not going to have this 6-foot dish sitting out in your yard when you can have this tiny one sitting up here and get the same thing. And you could, basically. I was fortunate. I saw them coming. I always studied whatever business I was in. I always studied trends and what's going on, and I saw it coming. So about I guess maybe 6 months before they'd already announced when they were going to have it. So 6 months before it actually came out, I had started looking for a job, and I was coming back from Knoxville. I was working down in Knoxville. I was coming back from Knoxville. I was listening to FM 94. I was listening for race results, and I heard on FM 94 that they were looking for employees. So instead of turning off and going towards Lebanon to go home, I lived at Rosedale then. I just stayed on 81 and went to Marion, walked in and said, "What do you need?" And he said, "Well, I need a good salesman." I said, "I'm probably the best salesman you've ever seen. I've got a 98% closing ratio."
Well, I don't hear any love loss necessarily from you, like leaving coal, but I also don't hear any like animosity.
No, I haven't.
Coal.
I have no.
But do you think it was like for you like a net positive?
My coal mining experience was positive in every way, but with what had happened, what was happening to coal right then, when you see mine after mine after mine closing, and there's no hope for any real growth to where you could get back to where it was like it was. And remember, I had seen my dad in that same situation go to Baltimore and drive a city bus, go to Richmond and be a prison guard. He was a jewel tea salesman. I mean, he sold there's some kind of an insurance. I forget now what it was that he sold that insurance. He did anything he could do to make money. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to find something that I could settle into and do. But that being said, when you get in that situation, sometimes what you think you're going to get into that's going to be long term, like the satellite dish, it didn't. It's like I had friends that were selling cell phones, car phones. They weren't cell phones then. They sell one. They made $3,000. They were selling 5, 6 a day. They kept trying to get me into that, and I'm reading about how they're coming out with these smaller and smaller versions, and I'm like, that'd be the same situation I'm in. I'll be in the same situation. And honestly, I didn't know anything about satellite radio when I went to work in the radio business. But satellite radio never hurt radio at all. Consolidation of radio stations is what hurt radio. When they started having one company control too many radio stations, and they made a bad policy move, or they made a bad decision, then it didn't just affect their company because they were the biggest. They would do something. Well, everybody else thought, well, we need to sell 15-second commercials too. No, you don't need to sell 15-second commercials. They don't work. Anyway, no, I had no animosity whatsoever. And many of the people that I worked with and worked for, of course, a lot of the ones I worked for have passed, but they were still good friends of mine. When you make those kind of life decisions, you've got to be able to agree with yourself that you made the right decision. Then you've got to go out and prove to yourself, and sadly, a lot more people too, that you made the right decision. Because everybody second guesses you. When I went to work selling radio, selling commercials and radio, I never had one single person tell me, well, that's a good idea. I don't remember what year it was. Anyway, there were 7 people in the United States selling radio advertising that sold over $1 million. Well, there probably was more, but one of the industry magazines did an article on it, and my boss submitted my name because I was selling over $1 million, $1.2 million, something like that, and he submitted my name. Well, they came and interviewed me for it, and they wanted to know how I did it. I said, I get up in the morning, I go see 5 people, and I make 5 presentations. And after I've made my 5 presentations, I start building my database to who I'm going to talk. carried a tape recorder with me. If I'd drive by a business that was going in, I'd give myself a note, tell me to go back and find out what the business was. It's what you do. But I was the only person out of the 7 that wasn't in Houston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Chicago. I was the only one that wasn't in the major city. We were selling $75 radio commercials. You got to sell a lot of $75 commercials.
Where was that out of?
FM 94
In
Marion, Virginia. One of the things that I learned when I was working in other cities, that if there were people that had been in the mining business and I could hire them, they became very successful. I hired more than one. I hired a couple in the satellite sales stuff, and they did very well. And I hired a couple in the radio business. I hired when I was in Savannah, I hired a girl from Bluefield, West Virginia, that went to Beaver. I hired a guy from Richlands, went to Richlands High School, and they were very successful. They did because you know what they learned? They had a work ethic. The brotherhood that you have with the people you work with underground, that's probably the biggest thing. And I think that's the biggest thing you miss when you leave. But you've got to understand when something's over, it's over. It's sort of like when Dale Earnhardt got killed. That was an end of an era. And I think now that the stuff that goes on in NASCAR probably wouldn't be going on. I don't watch it anymore. It's just unwatchable. All these gimmicks they're trying to get people to watch and everything. But it's kind of the same thing. You have to recognize stuff in your life, that it's over. I guess most people understand more about a marriage if you compare it to that. There's a time when you got married and everything was fine, and you go along there and everything seems fine and then one day you say, well, it ain't fine no more. You got to see what's wrong. Is there something you can do to fix it? If you can't fix it, it's over. You've got to be able to move on. And that's kind of what I feel. I felt like that with the coal industry, I had an amicable divorce. I didn't, had it not worked out the way it did, had it kept booming, had they not shut all those mines down, I'd probably still been there when I retired. I probably, or got killed, one of the two. But once you get to the point where, I can, some of these guys, I've studied a lot of stuff about these guys that are in the fishing, off-coast fishing industry, and how their jobs are disappearing because of quotas on fish and different things. But they keep trying and and they're saying, if I can just pay my next payment on my boat, you hear, it's you've got to understand, is there something else I can do with this boat? Can I go to Florida and charter this thing out and make money with that? But they don't, it's I think the people in the mountains can improvise. I think that we learned from a very early age, if you look around, you might not have the perfect tool, but you've got something you can make it work with. And I think that's the difference in the mountain philosophy and the coal miner philosophy. Because I don't know too many flatlanders that work in the coal mines, or not in the ones we had.
That's some gold right there. Just like what you said earlier about the truck, the camper top.
Yes.
That's exactly. That's the same thing what you just said.
Oh, it is.
You improvise.
It is. You have to. When I decided, when I got married, and decided I wasn't happy in the coal mines, or in driving the truck back and forth to New York City, when I decided that I wasn't happy doing that anymore, I was happy doing that anymore. I would have been tickled to death to continue doing that. I had a wonderful, wonderful time. I was in New York City talking to people, learning things. I would go. a lot of times I came back with a empty truck. I'd load it up, take the stuff up there. First, when I first started, I would put it all out at one place where Eastern Isles office was in New York. After I'd been up there a couple times, I figured out I'm sitting in this office 6 hours a day without anything to do, waiting for somebody to come 3 blocks and pick up some stuff that I got on the truck, and I can't take it off, or I've already got everything off here. I can't get nothing else off until it's, that kind. So I went to my boss, Ron Batcho, and I said, Ron, I said, this is Thursday. I'd like to leave tomorrow. I said, I've got enough stuff on this truck. If they keep coming at this rate, I won't be able to leave this week. And he said, well, what do you want to do, deliver it? I said, that's what I'm asking you. Can I deliver it? He had to call 3 people to see if it was okay for a truck driver to drive 3 blocks. I mean, it was, so we had 4 truck drivers, and they would miss. They wouldn't show up because you were gone so long. And they had wives too, and their wives didn't like them being gone that long. And we got paid pretty well, but they didn't think we got paid well enough when they go up and they talk to Teamsters drivers that are making 3 times as much as we are an hour. But the Teamsters drivers got paid while they were driving. We got paid when we slept. When we got a hotel room, they paid for the hotel room, and they paid us while we were sleeping. They didn't, that's how they made up for the difference in it. Anyway, Ron said, okay, we're going to try this once. So I had, about 45 minutes. I had almost the whole truck unloaded. Came back over there. And so they decided, since that had worked so good, the stuff that we had out there waiting on them to come and pick it up, they had 2 guys that worked upstairs. They had them take it back and put it on the truck, and I delivered it too, and I got out of there. So the next time I came up, I get to the office, and they've got the addresses of everywhere. And they had told them in Richlands how to load the truck. My first stop was at a place called Empire Carriers every week. Now, we did that always, even before this. Empire Carriers in New York. The reason they called it Empire Carriers is right here's the Empire State Building. 2 blocks over here is the Empire Carriers. Backed in there, unloaded the back third to half the truck, and then everything else went to the office. Well, unloading at Empire Carriers, when you did that, bing, that was just wonderful. So I couldn't understand why I couldn't do the rest of that like that. Oh, by the way, when when I go to Empire Carriers, before I left for New York, every week I went by Elmo Warner's Wholesale in Richlands and bought a case of cigarettes. I didn't smoke. But when I walked into Empire Carriers, my truck's parked on the outside. I walk in there, I've got a bag, and I set it on the desk, and a guy named Larry knew me. He'd pick those up and put them under the counter, and he'd say, hey, Virginia, we got a spot for you, back that truck in. There'd be 15 trucks outside. I'd go out there, and they had 4 big doors. They kept one of them open for people like me. I'd go out there and get my truck, back it in, back it over to the conveyor belt, start throwing it off. I was in there less than 45 minutes every time. And
what kind of cigarettes did he smoke? You remember?
Lucky Strikes. So, but now that was not the only ones that got the cigarettes. So everything you did, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and I carried the grease because I didn't want to listen to the squeaks. And that was one of the best things in the world. And there was some revenue that was attached to you're paying $1 or less than $1 a carton in Richlands, Virginia, and they're paying $6 a carton now they're paying $6 a pack. They were paying $6, $7 a carton in New York. So if you had Phil Goldstein, Ron Batcho, Iz Rosner, they all smoked. Everybody in that building smoked. And, have you got any cigarettes left? Yeah, I think I've got to keep a couple of cartons though, and they'd be gone every week. I mean, it wasn't and that's extra money, and like I was telling you, a lot of times you come home, right, empty. Your truck's empty. That's really good when you're coming home because, you're moving. Well, I had a guy He ran a lunch stand, 29th and Madison Avenue. Sometimes, if you get a chance, watch the movie Valley of the Dolls, and when the main character comes from Connecticut to New York, she runs into the Martha Washington Hotel for Women. Just the next door down was where our offices was on 29th Street. Madison Avenue this way and 29th Street this way. Eating at this lunchroom there all the time. Guys from Columbia, South America, not South Carolina, South America. He wanted to come to the United States, and he didn't know anything about anything but Hollywood. So he went, saved his money, got his visa, went and got him a ticket to Hollywood. They flew him in. They flew him into South Carolina somewhere, and his bus took him to Hollywood, South Carolina. So he ended up, I mean, this was 40 years before this, and he ends up, he's like 50-some years old, and he's running this lunch stand. He's got 4 stools. That's all. Everything's carry out. He's got 3 guys. They all spoke Spanish. I don't know, and they're running. They're delivering everywhere. I ate there at lunch every day I was there. Got to know him real good. So one day he said, y'all sell clothes? I said, well, we sell ladies and children's sleepwear. He said, "Did you ever get any?" He's basically asking me, did I ever take any? And I'm not a thief. I don't steal stuff. And I said, well, it's kind of hard to come by. You didn't want to just. And he said, well, if you ever get any, he said, I'll pay you $1 a garment. I said, $1 a garment. That wasn't anything. But when you got a case of pajamas that's got 6 dozen in them, $1 a garment's a lot more money than we were selling them, probably $7-8 a piece to Saks. I forget now all the ones that we did have. Macy's, Gimbel's, all those, all the big names in New York we sold to. All right, so we had 2 stores that were second stores. We had one in Middletown, New York, and then we had one in somewhere in North Carolina. I can't even remember where it was. But I got to thinking on the way to Middletown. I thought, well, let me talk to them up there and see. So I went and talked to the manager of the store, and she had to call the guy that ran we had a factory there too, and she had to call him because he was over the store. And so he comes to talk to me. I said, well, everything in here, what'd you sell it to me for? He said, everything. I said, yeah, everything in here. He said, well, I can't sell you everything. I said, why? He said, we won't have any inventory. He said, we sell a lot of stuff here. I said, well, what about the stuff you can't sell? He said, oh, you mean the stuff that's real? And I said, I don't want nothing real damaged. He said, I said, stuff that may not appeal as much. He said, I'll give it to you. I said, give it to me. He said, yeah. I said, we burn it most of the time. So every time I would go up there, I'd have 8 to 12 boxes of pajamas and these footy things, different things. The guy's name in New York, his name was Reese. And he trusted me and I trusted him. I would go in there, 3 o'clock in the morning. He had access to the freight elevator. We'd unload that stuff, put it in the elevator. He'd take it down, take it to Long Island. His sister had 3 stores out there. They would go through it. Some of it they wouldn't buy because, it was obviously not good. But then the next time I'd see him, he'd hand me cash, a lot of cash. I bought my first ex-wife a mink coat, a fox coat, I don't know what all, on the streets in New York. Not in a store. I'm in the garment industry and in the garment district. These guys come down through there pushing these roller racks with all this stuff on it. Stoles, coats, and whatever. You stop them and say, how much? I don't know, how much you give me? Well, how much you want? I don't price your stuff, you price it to me. take the whole rack and have it for $100. They'd have 15 fur coats on there. First ones I bought, I thought, well, I've been took here, because it's probably not real. So I took it to a well-known clothier in Richlands, Virginia, and he said, oh yeah, you did good. So I mean, it was just, the point is, I would have not gone to work in the coal mines because I had it made with what I was doing. And you just a little bit on your, on your own abilities to figure out, you can do stuff other than just drive up here and back. You're going to be here. Keep your eyes open. Pay attention. Situational awareness. If you're somewhere in the wrong place, you might end up getting your arm cut by somebody with a knife because they don't think you should be there. That happened to me in New York. I had a real nice bomber jacket that got cut there, and then I took it off and held it on my arm to keep from getting stabbed. And I won't tell you the outcome of that on camera. But needless to say, I'm here. So it was an interesting situation. But everything there, you learn so much. There's stuff goes on, stuff you see in New York. It's just unreal. So I'm going down a one-way street one time, just as hard as I can go, 35 miles an hour probably. And I look up, and here comes this car coming at me. He's going about 55, and a police car right behind him. I stopped. Because I think the car's going to hit me. He stops. Police car rear ends the car. Drives him up against my truck. Didn't hurt my truck. Drives him up against it. So the police come. They start giving me a hard time. Said, you're on a one-way street. I said, yeah, I am. Right there's your sign. That's the way it's going. And the guy looked and he said, oh, dear God. Because their cop chased somebody down the road. And so that's the fourth car he's got. He said, he's on the street now walking. But you see stuff like that, Holland and Lincoln tunnels in New York City, you can't pass. It's illegal. You got a solid line. You can't pass. What's you in lane? I'm going down through there. Right lane's not moving. There ain't nothing in the left lane. I pull in the left lane and I go right on through. So I get to the other side and a cop comes out behind me and stops me. Can't pass in the tunnel. Traffic wasn't moving in the right lane. You can't pass in the tunnel. I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, I ain't going to sit there. And he said, where are you from? I said, I'm from Virginia. He said, you a hillbilly? I said, yeah, I am. He said, I ain't worth you. Just get out of here. Just get out of here. You could exaggerate your accent in certain situations, and it was a benefit. In other situations, your accent was not a benefit. Got invited to a party because of in New York because of one of the guys that I worked with up there, and it was a pretty big deal. They had foods that I'd never eaten. I didn't even know they were real. They had chocolate-covered ants and chocolate-covered grasshoppers. I'd done eat a half a dozen grasshoppers before I found out they were real grasshoppers. That was not at all fun. The ants weren't too bad, but once you realize the grasshoppers and you've been eating grasshopper guts, and we caught grasshoppers to fish with all our life, so didn't like that. Found out what several different kinds of foods were that I'd never eaten. I ate my first bagel in New York City. Used to go to this little Indian restaurant down from where our office was. What I had to spend the nights there. I had a truck stolen from me in New York. Oh, we had New Jersey, in Jersey City. They had me staying in Jersey City because it was safer than staying in New York. So I get up one morning to drive back into the city and don't have a truck. Somebody had stolen it. Cops come. They're interviewing me. Well, I drove from Richlands, Virginia. That's interstate commerce. So they had to call the FBI. So they had a ring of going on up there at the time that they thought a lot of drivers were involved with delivering their trucks to be stolen. So this one FBI guy gets in my face, and I'm standing up here. There's no place to sit. The cops are sitting, and cops were real nice. New York City police officers were wonderful because they knew what it was. FBI guy gets right up in my face, and I mean, I'm against the desk, I can't go nowhere. And spit coming out of his mouth asking me who I was working with and all this stuff. I pushed him back. And when I did, he reached for his sidearm and I knocked him down. I didn't just knock him down, I knocked him out. And one of the cops got up and put handcuffs on him. And the other FBI guy is going berserk. And he says, "You're going to get locked up too. So you can't do this. We don't intimidate people the way you're doing right there." And that one of the police officers had married a girl who graduated from University of Virginia, but she was not from our end of the state. But he thought he knew a lot more about Virginians than he did. He probably did, but he didn't know about Appalachian Virginians. And you just don't. You're going down the street and a taxi driver. You're walking across. You got the crosswalk, and the taxi driver starts cussing you. Yeah, you follow him to the red light, pull him out of the car, and slap him a time or two. You don't let them call you names, And it took me about 1.5 years to learn you don't do that. It's if somebody calls you a bad name in New York City, they just call that to everybody. But we didn't grow up like that. If we were on the playground, if we were walking down the street and somebody called you some of the names that you hear used all the time now, you didn't do that. You're gonna knock them down. And it's just, I learned, like I said, so much about how to deal with so many different things in that time that I was in New York that it was just amazing. Now, some of that stuff, when I went to work in the coal mines, boded very well for me because I was used to being in all kinds of stressful situations, either in the traffic, a bunch of wrecks up here. I was in an ice storm in outside of Hackensack, New Jersey one time. 75 tractor trailers wrecked. I don't know how many cars they hit, like the dust storm that just happened. Dead people everywhere. And I slid down through that. I didn't hit anybody. God was saying, "Boy, you got a little ways to go. We're going to just get you through this." There's no doubt in my mind because, I should have been part of that, but I didn't. You learn, and you deal with stress, or stress kills you. And in the coal mines, there's a lot of stress there. Now, 80% of it, we take and exponentially raise it to a point where it's harmful to us. We've got to learn how to look at each thing that's going on and take it to its ultimate result before we start bringing anything else in on this. Now, the other thing is, some things you can't fix right now. If you can't fix it right now, but you have an idea how you can fix it, there's no use to worry about it. There's no use to stress over it. Just open up a different box over here in your brain, shove this over here, put a date or a time on it, and then go do the other stuff. And then when you get the other stuff done, oh crap, now I've got to do this over here. I wish I had thrown that box away, but you still got to do it. It's what you have to do. You have to learn, and coal mining especially is something you got to do that for. In the positions I had, most of the positions I had, I didn't just have to mine coal. I had to mine coal. I had to maintain the conveyor belts. I had to maintain the outside areas of the mines. I had to maintain the track and the wiring. Had to maintain the electrical systems that went into it. All this was fun. I mean, when you're doing stuff and you're succeeding, and you look at that report at the end of the month and you see how much tonnage that you were responsible for getting out and how much money you made the company, it's a wonderful feeling. But when you know that's not there anymore, like we said, when you know that's not going to happen anymore, you got to move on.